Force Touch trackpad, Thunderbolt 2, Intel Broadwell processors, and a faster SSD. The 2015 MacBook Pro has seen a pretty decent update, but is it worth it? Take one look around and you'll see the design hasn't changed much. That's not really a complaint though. The Retina MacBook Pro has been one of the best built laptops for a few years now, and the 2015 model is no exception. It's a solid aluminum chassis with some of the tightest tolerances out there, and subtle touches, like a nicely weighted hinge so you can open up the lid without picking up the entire laptop. It's got a pair of decent speakers hidden on the edges by the ports that double as intakes for the fan. The MacBook vents above the keyboard, which can still breathe even with the lid closed. The keyboard is still about as good as it gets for a laptop. They could add just a touch more key travel in my opinion, but it's nicely spaced and keeps the adjustable backlighting, which automatically kicks on in darker environments. Something shared from the new MacBook is the Force Touch trackpad. It looks the same, however instead of being a normal click pad, there's a Haptic Engine which vibrates the trackpad when you click. It sounds bizarre, but it actually works. You can notice the lack of travel compared with a normal MacBook, but it does feel like you're clicking. Turn off the laptop and it's really trippy. It moves a tiny amount, but nowhere near as much as it feels like when it's actually on. It's also pressure sensitive, which lets you use the new Force Touch gesture in OS X. For example, the harder you press, the more you fast forward in QuickTime, with a slight bit of feedback as you go through each of the speeds. The coolest way to use this is in Safari, where you can force click on a link to preview before actually opening it. It took me a few days to get used to it, but the new trackpad is a nice addition. For ports, you've got an SDXC card reader, HDMI and USB 3.0 on the right side, along with MagSafe 2 for charging, a pair of Thunderbolt 2 ports, along with one more USB, and a combo headphone microphone jack. The Thunderbolt ports are the most interesting. Having that much bandwidth is mostly useful for high-end RAID arrays and docks that give you things like extra USB ports, Ethernet, and HDMI off a single cable. They also double as many display ports with the ability to drive 4K monitors at 60 Hz. It won't be buttery smooth, but it is totally possible. Speaking of that screen, the MacBook Pro is sporting a 13.3-inch IPS display with a resolution of 2560 by 1600. While this has been passed by Windows laptops pushing resolutions up to 4K, in practice the MacBook is more than sharp enough. It's got solid viewing angles, a far cry from the MacBook Air, which washes out almost immediately. OS X scaling is quite a bit better than on Windows 2. It scales the resolution by double, giving you the same screen real estate as a 1280 by 800 display by default. You can adjust this up to 1680 by 1050, but for me the sweet spot was 1440 by 900, giving you a decent amount of resolution without making things too tiny. There are also apps like SetResX that will drop the Retina scaling altogether if you really need every single pixel, which I use for some apps like SpeedGrade. Things like the design and screen are important, but a laptop is basically a paperweight without some decent specs. The base configuration comes with a Broadwell Core i5 with Iris 6100 graphics, 8GB of RAM, and a 128GB SSD. Compare this with the new MacBook, and for the same price you get a 256GB drive, but a much less powerful Core M processor. We'll see how they actually compare soon, so be sure to subscribe to catch my video on the new MacBook, but the Pro is looking pretty solid right now. The 13-inch Pro I've got here is upgraded with the Core i7, 16GB of memory, and a 512GB SSD. One of the big behind-the-scenes upgrades on the new MacBook is a faster PCIe-based SSD. It's fast, like the fastest SSD I've ever tested, with read and write speeds over 1300 megabytes per second. Things get a little less exciting when you look at the CPU though. We're still looking at a dual-core chip across the board on the 13-inch MacBook. If you want quad-core, you'll have to take the step up to the 15-inch. The new 14nm Broadwell chips do keep the clocks relatively high. Even the base 13-inch starts at 2.7 GHz and goes up to 3.4 GHz with the Core i7. Still though, we've only got 2 cores, and the Geekbench numbers top out at just about half of what the 15-inch MacBook can muster. On the graphics side, things are a bit better. The Iris graphics are able to keep OS X running nice and smooth, and it posts a solid improvement over the MacBook Air and last gen Pro and Cinebench. No one should buy a Mac for gaming, but that graphics performance does make some light gaming possible. Minecraft runs no problem here with everything turned up, and even a heavier title like Tomb Raider is playable as long as you don't mind turning down the settings a bit. One of the biggest questions I've had was how the 13-inch Pro handles video. I've edited my last 3 videos with Adobe Premiere CC on the MacBook, and I've been pleasantly surprised. It's able to keep up with editing 1080p AVC HD clips just fine, only slowing down when I'm working with complicated effects. Where I really miss a quad-core CPU is when exporting, but for the actual edit, the 13-inch MacBook Pro is absolutely usable. Battery life isn't too bad either. With lighter use like listening to music and web browsing, you should expect around 9 hours of longevity, where things like gaming and video editing will bring that closer to 3 hours. The MacBook Pro is an expensive laptop. You do get a solid build, excellent screen, impressive new trackpad, and a blisteringly fast SSD. The lack of dedicated graphics is a slight disappointment, but not having a quad-core CPU option is a big problem for a laptop at this price. 95% of the time you won't notice, but I would happily trade a couple hours of battery life to have the extra power when I need it. If you're looking at a MacBook, the 13-inch Pro is the best trade-off between power and portability, but you're going to have to pay for it. So what do you guys think about the new MacBook Pro? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed and want to see more videos like this, definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.